Buenas tardes a todos, mi nombre es María Martí, soy la presidenta del Ayn Rand Center Latinoamérica, un centro que se dedica a difundir y promover la filosofía de Ayn Rand en la región. En esta ocasión estamos llevando a cabo el 6º webinario de esta serie que hemos comenzado ya hace más de un mes. Y antes de comenzar con este webinario, quería simplemente hacer una introducción a algunos temas. A los que nos vienen siguiendo, lamento repetir la información, pero creo que vale la pena para aquellas personas que se han sumado por primera vez. En primer lugar, por favor que visiten nuestra página que es aynrandlatam.org, donde en forma permanente estamos subiendo nuevos artículos sobre objetivismo en español, traducimos videos, traducimos información y todo contenido objetivista, así que creo que van a encontrar un buen material para introducirse mejor en lo que es el objetivismo. También mandamos un newsletter mensual que se llama Rand Express, al cual se pueden suscribir con buenos links, con buena información, contando un poco las actividades que está llevando a cabo el centro. Se pueden suscribir entrando justamente en aynrandlatam.org y abajo del muro, del principio de la página, van a encontrar abajo un suscribirse al newsletter. También les pedimos que nos sigan en nuestra fanpage Ayn Rand Center Latinoamérica en Facebook, y tenemos un grupo que es Ayn Rand Latinoamérica, en donde debatimos temas relacionados justamente con objetivismo. También nos pueden seguir en Instagram y en Twitter en Ayn Rand Latam. También quiero incentivarlos a, si tienen preguntas sobre objetivismo, si tienen sugerencias de temas que les divertirían justamente que tocáramos o que analizáramos en estos webinarios, si quieren participar en clubes de lectura que venimos organizando, si quieren organizar un evento en la ciudad en la que viven, este año un poco complicado, pero quizás para el año que viene, o si quieren organizar un webinario sobre objetivismo o algún tema en particular tratado desde el punto de vista objetivista, por favor, escríbanos a info@aynrandlatam.org. También les recomendamos, para aquellos que hablan inglés, se está traduciendo la información, pero para aquellos que hablan inglés ya pueden bajar a sus teléfonos la aplicación Ayn Rand University, en donde hay centenares de cursos sobre objetivismo. Y también para aquellos que manejan bien el inglés, les recomiendo un programa de filosofía que organiza el Ayn Rand Institute que se llama Objectivist Academic Center. Soy una graduada del programa y realmente el modo que te enseña cómo pensar filosóficamente y cómo te introduce en todas las ramas del objetivismo, de la filosofía, comprendiendo lo que es el objetivismo, es un programa que súper recomiendo, así que si tienen interés en él, se contactan con nosotros y yo los voy a poner en contacto con la gente del Ayn Rand Institute. Último consejo siempre, por supuesto, es ir a las fuentes, lean Ayn Rand, que no hay mejor manera de entender lo que es el objetivismo que leyendo justamente Ayn Rand. Antes de continuar, quiero pedirles si puede por favor completar una encuesta. Nixon, si podés subirla aquí. Queremos conocer un poco la familiaridad de nuestra audiencia con las ideas de Ayn Rand. Si pueden completar alguno de estos, cómo se sienten familiarizados. Les vamos a dar 10 segundos. Y continuamos. Bueno, el tema que vamos a tratar hoy es el tema de justicia en la vida personal y nuestra speaker va a ser Tara Smith. From now on, I'm going to speak in English, so the webinar is going to be in English. The topic is justice in personal life, and our speaker is Tara Smith. Before beginning, I want to tell you that the format of this webinar is going to be a little bit different. We're going to do an interview, and Agustina Vergara Cid, who is a junior fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute and lawyer and master of laws, is going to join me in this interview. So thank you, Agustina. And to introduce Tara Smith, Tara is a professor of philosophy at the University of Texas and member of the board of directors of the Ayn Rand Institute. So let me stop sharing my camera here. Hello, Agustina, how are you?
Hi, Maria, how are you? Thanks for having me.
And please let me introduce Tara Smith. Welcome, Tara. Welcome, Agustina. Thank you very much for joining me in this webinar.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure. And just let me say that when I invited you to do this webinar and you said, okay, let's talk about justice in personal life, for me it was say, wow, this is really a very good topic, because I think most of us are used to hear justice, but always related to politics or economics. So to talk about justice in personal life is a different topic. And at the same time, I think it's very good, because one of the things that we want to do with the center is to show people how philosophy can really help you in your personal life. It's not only about economics and politics and how to change the society, but how to change and improve your life through a good philosophy. So thank you for bringing the topic.
No, I agree that I think we normally think of justice in terms of law or politics, and it's very important in those realms. But Rand treated it as one of the moral virtues that informs your personal life as well as societal life. So it was a very important virtue in just everyday dealing with her.
Yeah, I agree completely. So, Tara, I will start with one question, and Agustina, I put this interview in your hands. Okay. So, Rand, one of the things that always said that it's very important to define terms. So, before starting to talk about justice, I want to ask you, Tara, what is justice, or what is the essence of justice?
Okay, very good place to start. And I will give you basically what is Ayn Rand's definition of it, or Ayn Rand's conception of it. She said, and I'll go over this so you don't have to get it all at once, but justice is the virtue of judging other people objectively and treating them accordingly, giving them what they deserve. So let's unpack that a little bit, because there are a few elements, and each of them is really important. It's about judging people. It's not about judging cars. You know, I mean, there are lots of things that we judge, but inanimate objects. When I'm buying tomatoes in the supermarket, I'm judging this tomato or that tomato, right? Justice is about judging people, human beings. Judging them, the virtue of justice is judging other people objectively. So we can come back to what that means, but that's crucial. It's not just judge them any old way or emotionally, right? It's judging other people objectively and then following up by treating them accordingly. You act on the basis of the assessment, the judgment, the appraisal that you make of a person. And even to be a little bit more specific in how you act toward that person, you give them what they deserve. You don't give them more than they deserve. You don't give them less than they deserve. But essentially, that's her concept. It's judging other people objectively and then acting accordingly, in particular, giving them what they deserve from you. Okay, so again, we can expand on some of that, but wherever you'd like to go.
Yeah, so that's a good definition. I agree with it. And now you're just saying it. It's like it has, I think, like two components: the thinking that goes behind judging, and then the acting, which is giving to that person like what they deserve, right?
Yes.
But like if you look at that definition by Rand, it's different than the definition of justice than that we normally hear, I think. And particularly, you know, in Latin America, the definition of justice that is like most prevalent and that comes to us from, you know, political leaders and intellectual leaders and even spiritual leaders is very much in line with more, you know, the account of kind of like Marxist type account of like from each according to his ability, to each according to his need and things like that. But Rand clearly had a very different definition of this. So how is Rand's definition different?
No, that's very interesting. And part of what's interesting is that historically, if you go back further, if you go back centuries, if you go back to the ancient Greeks, Aristotle, Plato, not just Aristotle, if you go back to Judaism and Christianity, actually, when you look, and I remember years ago as a graduate student having an entire seminar, an entire semester where we studied different theories of justice. It was striking how essentially, like when they had to define justice, it was basically about treating people as they deserve. I think that's really been watered down and both diluted and perverted in the last 150, 200 years. And I think Marx, who you raised, is a very good example of that. But historically, the basic idea of when you're just, you treat people as they demand. You treat people as they deserve. You try to figure out, is he guilty of the crime? You know, whether you're in a court of law or in sort of personal interactions with people, did he do it or not? I'll punish my child if I think, no, you stole the cookies or whatever it might be, right? Or you took that thing from the other kid. So the core idea is not unusual. What's unusual is that she still sticks to it today. I mean, she did in the 1960s and 70s when she was writing and talking about this, and she very much would today when, as you say, Augustina, the prevalent notion, not only in Latin America, is much more collectivist. It views justice much more from the lens of what's good for society. So whether one is an actual Marxist who says from each according to his need, or a simple collectivist of some other stripe, the basic idea is that justice has to do with the whole, the group, society, and the group is better off, therefore it's just that you give up some of what you've earned, some of what you deserve by, let's say, your hard work, right? So we have perverted the notion, and more egalitarian notions are very much not just ascendant, they're now dominant today. But it's those that really get away from, the traditional idea of justice. Now, having said that Rand's basic idea was similar to a lot of older historical ideas, her justification for it was very different, and her consistency in adhering to it. Because, I mean, yeah, Saint Augustine, okay, go back to, early AD centuries, okay? Yeah, he believed in justice as treating people what they deserve, and he believed in mercy and all these other things that are incompatible with it. So that you'll find that much more than the consistency of Ayn Rand, who's like, no, justice is treating people as they deserve. No better, no better than that. So again, we can come back to that.
Yes, and part of what you were saying is how this notion of justice has been perverted and kind of like collectivized. I think maybe part of what that does, among other things, is that it takes away the notion that justice is something that we can practice in our daily lives, in our interactions with other people, just just living our lives. So I guess what I want to ask, I guess what I go ahead. Good. No, what I wanted to ask is how does this issue of justice arise, in an everyday life and our interactions and with other people?
Good. Yeah. Well, okay, let's think back to what I said, what Rand thinks justice is. Judging other people objectively, treating them accordingly. Just think, everybody out there, think, have you had to judge anybody in recent days? Now, I'm not saying somebody asked you, what's your verdict on Maria? What's your verdict on Jose, right? And in normal life, when we're not locked in because of the pandemic, in normal life, we're dealing with all sorts of people in lots of little ways, but you're deciding, for example, I'm going to go back to that cafe. The coffee there is really good. Or I'm not going to go back to that pizza place because the service there, the waiters there, they're really rude. They're really surly. Notice these are just incidental little judgments that you make that affect your actions and how you treat them. If the waiter isn't too good, you don't leave him a very good tip, for instance, okay? But that's just one kind of example. Let me just throw out a few others very quickly. You're trying to figure out who to room with next year. Like, let's say you're living on your own, but you're finding it's a little hard to pay all the bills, so you really want to find a roommate. You probably don't adopt a first come, first served, I'll just room with anybody who's right. You pay attention to who you know better than other people, what their different traits are. She's a lot of fun to go out with. She's not too responsible. Therefore, living with her, I'm not sure she'd be good for that, right? So you need to judge the person objectively for the kind of relationship that you have with them and that you're looking to have. So a few more quick examples. You need a tutor. There's some, you're studying another language or you're studying trigonometry and you find I need a tutor. Again, you're going to want to assess who's going to be good or bad. You need a veterinarian now that you have a pet. Who's a good veterinarian, right? You might ask recommendations, you might look online and so on, but you need to judge people. Sometimes in our professional relationships, right? I'm going to go back to this restaurant. I'm going to go back to that car mechanic, but not that one that always seems to find 3 different problems more than what I brought the car in for, right? We judge people in professional relationships. We judge them as, he looks interesting. I might ask him to come to the party with the rest of, like that guy in class has been kind of interested and so on. So we're judging people constantly in so many ways. Who do you take a ride from? That Uber driver looked a little suspicious. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Do you get the idea there? Do you need more examples? What do you think?
Can I jump and ask one question?
Sure.
Would you say that the deeper a relation you expect to be, you need to judge more because you expect more of that person? Because you always say, no, you don't have to judge your partner or your girlfriend or your boyfriend. But I think it's the opposite, right?
Oh, yes. No, I think that's, again, good point. The deeper the relationship that you're contemplating having with somebody, as opposed to the more incidental, the more occasional, the more superficial the issue, right? The more serious the values that you have at stake, the more you need to think through, who is this person? What do I know about this person in the relevant respects, right? And it's exactly because you have values involved, right? If I'm going to live with this person, that's a lot more serious than I'm going to go out Saturday night with this person, right? So definitely the bigger the relationship that you're contemplating. It's one thing, I don't like this guy for my dry cleaners. But now I need to figure out who to hire to babysit a child. Well, you better take damn careful judgment of it, right? So that's where you're going to want to do your homework better and do your thinking better so that you can judge them objectively, really try to get it right and make the best judgment that you can for the sake of the values that you have at stake, the things you care about.
Yeah, and based on what you're saying, I think that's one of the many areas in life where, hierarchy of values comes into place. I mean, some of them are obvious. Obviously, dry cleaner is way less important in hierarchy of values than, who you're going to hire to be a babysitter. But some other values are kind of like a little bit harder maybe to put in that hierarchy, and some people don't think deep enough about that.
This is true. And it's not like there's this duty to judge everybody and you've got to spend half your waking day, oh my God, I got to be judging this one and that one and the postman. It's relative to the kind of relationship and what's at stake for you. But the greater the stakes, the more reason you have to think carefully about this person and his impact on the things that you care about. But obviously it takes time to judge a person objectively, to find out what you need to know, to think it through. And not every issue is worth the same amount of your investment, your time. But some things are, and you can't shy away from that. Yeah.
Yes, and so taking a step back and like what's coming out right now, I think it's kind of like obvious, but it's good to name it. Like an essential part of practicing justice is judging, obviously, and judging appropriately, and objectively. So I guess I have a 2-part question here, because what we normally hear and what I think is the predominant view is that one shouldn't judge other people, right? And, we get that from the Bible and from many other places that have a lot of influence in the culture and in society. So the question, I guess, is, should we judge others? And if we should, what are the conditions for us to like really do it objectively, like you said?
So, yes, and this is, again, one of the very distinctive features of Rand's account of justice. She does not shy away from the need to judge people. You should judge. Now, all shoulds, in her view, where do they come from? What are they based on? That it's in your self-interest to judge, right? Her endorsement of the virtue of justice is part of a whole rationally egoistic moral code and picture. But the reason to do anything is that this is going to be in your actual self-interest. So you need to judge people. And this, by the way, is one of the ways in which, even though I was saying, some old Christian views say, give people what they deserve. At the same time, they turn around and say, turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
Right? Judge not and be not judged. No, she was very explicit on this. Judge objectively. Don't judge overly hastily before you have enough information to go on. So this also gets to part of the rest of what you're asking, Augustina. Judge patiently, get the information you need. When you don't have enough information, you need to say, I don't yet have enough information. I can't reach a conclusion yet, right? Or I have a lot of information, but I haven't been able to put it all together yet. So there's no race to judge people. The reason why you're judging people is to try to figure out, what is his likely impact on me? And again, on my interest, on the things that I care about, right? Is he likely to rip me off? Is he likely to injure me in some way? Is he likely to waste my time? Might not be, as direct an assault, but is he likely to help me? Am I likely to learn from him? Am I likely to enjoy being out with him, right? What's his likely impact on me? That's what I want to know. I want to find that out. So I want to be objective, because objectivity is our means to figuring out the way things are. Now, we're fallible. We can make mistakes even when we think hard and long and objectively, but doing so, thinking objectively, is a precondition for reaching accurate conclusions about people. So part of what your question, I think, gets at is, what is it to judge people objectively? That big term in the whole equation here for Rand. Judge people objectively. Well, it means you go by the evidence. You don't, for instance, just go by your emotion. You don't simply go by what everybody else is saying about her. You look for, well, what's the evidence? What's the evidence in particular that's relevant to the kind of judgment you're trying to make about the person, right? I'm trying to figure out, would she be a good babysitter? Not is she the sweetest person in the world? Not is she a lot of fun at parties, but would she be reliable, responsible, level-headed if something unexpected came up? And so, right, there are certain qualities that are relevant to being a good babysitter. If that's what I want, I need to look for evidence that pertains to that. So judging objectively, you go by the evidence, the relevant evidence, relevant to the purpose for which you're making the judgment. And you only go by the evidence. You try to screen out the other stuff, not be distracted by extraneous sorts of information. Okay? I mean, that's, again, in a nutshell, basically. And as I said, sometimes you have to be patient. Sometimes it's frustrating. I want to know what I think about him or her, or whether I should do this or do that. And you don't yet have an adequate basis. So there's no prize, in Rand's view, for having a conclusion about everybody. Mm-hmm. You've got to, take your time to really learn what kind of conclusion is warranted.
Yes, I understand that. So, and I think Rand talks about it in at least one of her essays in The Virtue of Selfishness. So when you don't have really enough context and enough information about a person or situation that's going on that you really want to make a judgment of, is that an instance where you should really refrain from stating your judgment?
Well, definitely. If you don't yet have enough information, be honest about that. I mean, it's not objective to pretend that I do, right? Now, if it is an issue of real value to me, or like the stakes involved, this is important. I really do need to reach a conclusion here. Well, then I need to clear some more time in coming days such that I can, whether it be gather more information or talk to more people or think harder about it all, right? I mean, sometimes, for instance, you have a situation where you hear, let's say something like this. A lot of people who you know, and for whom you have, pretty good respect for their opinion generally, they're saying one thing about this other person you know. But another person you know, for whom you have great respect, is saying something different. Well, it seems like it would make sense to talk to him too. Like if I think, but I never hear him say something arbitrarily. He always has reasons. I don't always think he's right, but he always has reasons for the positions he takes on different things. So if he's got this starkly different view from what these other 3 or 4 friends are telling me about Mary, well, then it behooves me, right, to think I should at least ask him, hey, John, why are you thinking that, right? So you've got to, so again, it's going to depend in part on what the issue is, how serious it is to you. And it's, it's not always fun. I mean, sometimes we need to make judgments about things where we sense this is not going to be a pleasant conclusion either way, because I might offend certain people who I know and value. Like some of my friends might be disappointed because I'm going to come down one way or the other on something about which they're split or about which they care a lot. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to kind of want to punt, want to just evade the issue. So I'm not saying, it's always just easy and emotionally like eating vanilla ice cream to judge. It's not,
Yeah.
But you have to, if you really care about the value at stake, you have to be honest with yourself in thinking, okay, I need to sort this issue out more. Maybe it is an emotional issue for you. So maybe you need to do it over a period of days or weeks such that you can kind of let the emotions settle and just be really level-headed about it. But chip away at trying to come up with, the objective judgment. And an important qualification here. When you say, okay, I've reached a conclusion, you've got to be open to later correction. Right? The sheer fact that you you reached a conclusion, even rationally and objectively, and you were very responsible about looking at all the evidence and everything, that doesn't mean you're necessarily correct, right? We are fallible. Even when we're objective, we're still fallible. And if you're going to judge somebody objectively, you've always got to remain open to finding out more evidence that might work against what you had previously known. So it's not, I'm right for all time, I've reached an objective conclusion. No. To the context of my current knowledge, having investigated blah, 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 this is what I'm led to. If I'm wrong, show me. If, 2 months from now, you can show me I'm wrong, please point out the evidence that points in a different direction.
Yes, I'm glad
so often. Let me just add one thing. I think so often, and this particularly happens with political movements, for instance, we want to have our opinion and we want to be right. We want to know now. So we don't pay attention to all of the little questions on the periphery of our mind that we sense, well, I really ought to think about this, or that guy in that column really did make a good point that would tell against this other thing I've been thinking, but it's inconvenient, to think about that. A lot of what justice calls for is honesty with yourself about what you know, what you don't know, what you need to know to reach an objective conclusion about something.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that clarification, because one of the things that came to my mind when you were talking is sometimes we, like you said, we're rational and we think we're operating on all the relevant information and all the relevant facts to make a judgment. But it turns out that those facts were not completely accurate, and we discover later on that those facts were not accurate and we have to change our judgment. And that's, I think a lot of people find it really difficult to say, I was wrong, or to correct their position. And, but I think
that is so common. And I've never quite understood that. It just seems to me, it's true though. Like many people are very reluctant and uncomfortable with ever saying they're wrong. I don't have a problem with that, because, it really is just a matter of acknowledging our fallibility. And I think you might be embarrassed to admit you're wrong if you also know that I wasn't very responsible in the first place in reaching the conclusion that I did. But if you try to be really responsible and objective and rational, you have nothing to apologize for because you're not omniscient. Because sometimes further facts or evidence comes to your attention later that you had no reason to believe might be true, right? But yeah, I mean, it is a true phenomenon, but I think, again, you've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to be honest with other people of, wow, I made a mistake there. You know, I really misjudged him. I didn't know this, or I can see now. I mean, sometimes I did make a miscalculation. You know, it's not that I didn't have all the information, but I was weighing something too heavily, and I can now see that really was a mistake, and here's why I think it was a mistake. So, yeah, you've got to be honest. Feel free to interrupt me more, because as you can see, I can go on and on and on.
I will jump here. I have doubt. I think there's a lot of people that are not very integrated between what they think and how they act. So you have some people who says, I agree with this, but then they act in a different way. So how do you evaluate? How do you judge that person for the things that they do? Or how do you manage those situations?
So let me make sure I understand what you mean. Yeah. They say one thing, but they do another? Yeah. Is that kind of, yeah. Well, you can judge both.
There's a lot of people like that.
Yeah, I've met a few, and I've read about a few. Yeah, no, I know. There are a lot of people like this. I can get really angry about this, so let me try to control myself. But, I mean, you have to judge. You can judge people's ideas, and you can judge their actions. The whole point of ideas is to inform our actions. I mean, this was at the heart of Ayn Rand's view of the relationship between theory and practice, between mind and body, between philosophy and living. Hers, she called it a philosophy for living on earth. It's not a philosophy for the ivory tower. It's not a philosophy just for people who are philosophers at universities to talk about and write about and blah, blah. It is to guide us in action. So the person who professes certain ideas, whether they be big, grand ideas or just even much more limited sorts of ideas, the person who professes to believe certain things and doesn't act like it is a disgrace. He's a disgrace and an insult to the whole idea of ideas and to how seriously I take ideas. And everybody who takes his own living seriously should take ideas. Okay. Another little wrinkle on this, though. It's really easy to call out hypocrites, to criticize hypocrites. There are a lot of hypocrites around, as you say, Maria, and a lot of the media today satisfies itself with, on the right-wing media, calling out the hypocrisy of certain left-wingers and vice versa. The left-wingers love to do that to the right-wingers and everything else. As intellectual analysis, it's cheap and superficial and not all that valuable. Because what you really want to find out is what ideas are livable and what ideas have to be defied or cheated on in order for anybody to even think that idea is plausible, right? Say more about that. But yeah, no, I mean, if somebody says one thing and does another, call them out on it. It's like, which is it? Do you believe it or not? Or do you just believe that ideas are games? Because I take ideas seriously. So then don't waste my time telling me you believe in this if you're going to actually contradict that in your action. So that is, I think, a serious ground for a very negative evaluation, I think objectively a negative evaluation of a person. You're just a joker when it comes to ideas. You're just pretending.
I absolutely agree with everything you said, and I also get very upset with people that do not take ideas seriously, or like you said, like take it as a game or mock them or what have you. But earlier you were saying something. You were saying that sometimes people are kind of, I'm not sure if this is the word you use, but kind of like afraid to judge or reluctant to judge or try to evade judging because they might reach a conclusion that they do not really want to reach. Do you think, or they might it's a lot of work to judge, but also the conclusion that you might reach when you're judging objectively, I think it could be sometimes something that could be really disappointing to you. Do you think that's one of the reasons why people are so reluctant to judge? Because they might find that certain person that they value is not doing something because of an error of knowledge, let's say, but it's actually evil or something along those lines.
Well, I think that's at least sometimes. I don't think that's the dominant reason necessarily, but I think sometimes people say, oh, we shouldn't judge because they themselves don't want to make certain judgments, negative judgments about people they like on various grounds. And it would be painful either to have to confront that person about something, or even more dramatically to maybe no longer associate with that. I mean, that can be really painful, especially if this is a person with whom I've been really close for a long time. I mean, it can be really painful if you have to sever a relationship, or even simply broach what you're disappointed in the person about, or what you think was really bad and what they did, right? So it can be very unpleasant, but again, justice is you go by the evidence. You don't let your emotion lead. I don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation. I don't want to end this friendship. It's been a really good friendship for 15 years, right? It's wants don't rule, because, you know, pretending that somebody is other than he is doesn't make him other than he is. Mm-hmm. And this gets to really the core reason, again, for why we should be just, which I talked about indirectly, right? And we started out talking about what is justice, judge objectively, et cetera, right? Why judge? And this, again, it came up a little bit earlier, but because you have values at stake. Your self-interest, your happiness, your life is at stake. And all of the different individual components of that, the individual values, and other people stand to affect your values in positive ways and in negative ways, right? Mm-hmm. For good or for ill, in small ways, without even meaning to, they can affect, you know, how good an education you get, how good a year you have rooming with that person, right? You know, how good your child's education is because you went to that school versus that school, right? Other people stand to affect us, again, positively, negatively, in small ways, in big ways, everything in between. Therefore, it's in our interest to find out, who are these people? What are their characteristics? Their relevant characteristics. I want to hire him as a babysitter, a teacher, or whatever it might be. And kidding myself about somebody, just go, oh, he's such a likable guy. Yeah, he might be likable, or emotionally I might feel this way, positive or negative to him. That doesn't help me know, what is he? What are his characteristics that are relevant to the reason for which I need to judge him? So faking somebody's character doesn't change his character, and that's what affects everybody else. So in a way, I always think that Rand's case for justice is very similar to her case for honesty. Faking things doesn't change them, and that applies to people too. You know, pretending that they're other than they are, while it might be emotionally soothing sometimes, is not really, all things considered, long range, a good way to take care of your values.
And is that why Rand would say that the issue of justice and judging people objectively is self-interest and egoistic, and something you should do for your own sake?
Definitely. Yeah. And let me make one or two other comments before I come back to that, okay? Because I just thought of something else. Because in part of what you were asking a minute ago, you know, it's is part of why people are sometimes reluctant to judge, that they, you know, they might have to break off with somebody, or it might make them feel badly in certain ways. And I do think that's part of it. I think another kind of emotional motivation sometimes is, given that everybody goes around saying, oh, we're not supposed to judge people, and who are you to judge? Judge not and be not judged, and all that stuff. Well, then if Augustina makes a judgment of somebody, everybody's going to think, oh, Augustina, you know, she just thinks she's a know-it-all, or she knows everything. And I mean, you're going to get negative reactions simply for making a judgment. So that, I think, is often yet another disincentive. Well, I don't want everybody to think I'm judgmental in an irrational way, or that I'm just a know-it-all, or I'm stuck up or something. There are all sorts of negative connotations that go with being judgmental. So I think that too, if you're a second-hander who gives into the kind of social pressure, will be felt as a pressure against judging. So it takes a certain amount of courage, especially in this culture, to say, I'm reaching this judgment here. Now, again, if there's something wrong with the judgment, if I've got it wrong about this person, please tell me, please inform me, show me where I've made the mistake. Let me take a moment now to make one point. In thinking about judging people, I can't say enough how important it is to judge the positive in people. I think people often have the idea, if you advocate judging, that means you advocate criticizing and scolding people and finding fault and pointing out their faults and just being very negative and waving your finger at them and so on. When you judge people objectively, what you find is there's a lot of good stuff in people. People do a lot of praiseworthy things, and what they deserve is praise or thanks or appreciation or applause or congratulation. So I want to emphasize that, and Rand too, she was a gold digger in the sense that she was always looking for what's good in people. She was ruthlessly honest about what she saw, the good, the bad, the indifferent. But when you see good, and again, there's so many forms of good, again, small, big, but I'm a big believer in give that person an attaboy, as we say, or a kudos or a thumbs up or good for you, and just that little fan letter that says, way to go, or thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciated that, or I really loved your writing there. I'll sometimes write to authors who I've never met. They're not even philosophy authors. It might be fiction or something. But if I really enjoy some of their works and so on, I'll just write them a little fan letter. It's encouraging the good stuff in other people. It's also pleasurable because it tends to make you pay more attention to specifically what are the valuable components of other people. Mm-hmm. But just want to put in a big endorsement of judging includes judging the good and the positive. And if you're going to be just about it, you give the person what he deserves. He deserves thanks. He deserves credit. That was a great course that somebody taught at the OAC or wherever it might be. Okay. So now I've lost track of your most recent question. I'm sorry. What was your most recent question?
No, I think you answered it. But I wanted to make just one comment also on the issue of, we are told since we're little basically that we should not judge. And I think, there's a slight difference between the phrase, don't judge and you won't be judged or something like that, and the phrase, who am I to judge?
Yeah.
So do you think the phrase, who am I to judge, comes from a certain conception I cannot possibly know enough information. Yeah. I am not capable. There's no way I could ever, or anyone, be capable of, having enough context of information to make a judgment on a situation or a person.
Right. Which is ridiculous. But I think who are we to judge? As if, we're just so hopeless and helpless. Now, the fact is, people judge all the time. They may not pronounce their judgments. They may not always want to broadcast them to others, but if you never judged, you'd be dead in short order. You have to judge people. You judge where you get your food, your education, who you give your money to, who you take a job from. So in fact, it's a complete fraud, right? But it is such a fraud. Who am I to judge? One of the things I say when I teach this kind of issue sometimes is, I'm nobody special, but if I've done my homework, if I've found out what I need to find out, if I've investigated the relevant evidence and processed it logically and objectively, then it's not who I am that gives me license to judge. It's what I've done. It's that I've gone through an objective process. So in effect, who am I to judge is not the question, is not the right issue. Even though that is the phrase that we often use, I shouldn't judge. Who are you to judge, right? I'm nobody. My judgment, I'm not saying my judgment is right because it's Tara's judgment. No, that's ridiculous, right? But if you're making a judgment, you should be prepared to show the basis. You know, like, if I reached it on objective grounds, I can retrace those grounds. Look, here's the evidence. He said this, he did that. You know, here's his track record. He shows up late 4 days out of 5 rather than just once every 3 months or something, right? I mean, you've got evidence. So it's not, who am I to judge as if I'm judging on the basis of my identity. No, that's not the issue. It's what's the evidence. So that's a sort of...
Can I jump one more time? My last time to jump here. I think there's not only people who is afraid to judge, but there are people who don't judge because they are afraid to be judged.
Yes.
And they want to be liked by everyone. So how do you relate this topic maybe with self-esteem? Is there any relation there?
That's a very good, interesting psychological question. I definitely agree with your
another webinar, but
but I agree with your observation that sometimes it's, well, I don't judge people because that sort of keeps the world safer for me. I encourage this idea that we shouldn't judge, and then people will not look as closely as me because I'm afraid to be judged. And to the extent that one has that sort of feeling, I'm afraid to be judged, and actually lets that feeling, that fear of others' assessment rule them, that does reflect a deficit of self-esteem, right? I mean, if I basically am comfortable in my own skin, right? Doesn't mean I think I'm perfect. It certainly doesn't mean I think I'm infallible, right? But I basically, I'm good. I try to build up a good character, and I think I've done a good job of that, right? If that's my view, if I have that self-esteem, then I'm not afraid if other people want to look. I can explain anything they have questions about. I'm confident in my own judgment, which is a lot of what self-esteem comes down to. But the shakier the self-esteem, the more worried I'm going to be about how are people going to judge me. So it might be a good idea to spread this idea, nobody should judge everybody. And, by the way, I don't mean that people are consciously thinking all of this. It's not that everybody knows, this is the state of my self-esteem, and you're not consciously thinking I'm so afraid, but subconsciously, I do think a lot of that operates. So it's an interesting observation. Good point.
And one thing that I think it's important an important question to ask is, so let's assume when I'm judging a certain person and I have enough context, enough evidence and information to come to an informed judgment, an objective judgment. I mean, should when one reaches that stage, should one always feel compelled to pronounce a moral judgment and make it known? Or is that, or does that vary, or does it vary on what we're judging?
It definitely varies. None of this is about getting out a big microphone or a platform or a megaphone and letting the whole world know, or going online and telling everybody what you think of somebody. That's not what it's about, right? The whole reason to be just in personal life, we're talking about that, right? Primarily today, we're talking about justice as a personal virtue is I need to know about these people I'm dealing with. Now, if I find, that someone I know and that a lot of other people who I care about know well and have been trusting, I mean, if I find out something really quite seriously damning about this person that I think they stand to suffer from as well, then I should let them know because I really care about them as well. But there's no obligation and no rationality sometimes in broadcasting one's view. It also may be, this kind of case can arise once in a while. In my relationship with a particular person, there are aspects of that person that I find really disagreeable, not morally objectionable, not morally reprehensible in any way, but really unpleasant. It doesn't work for me, even to have certain professional associations with him. But I can see how other people might not have that kind of problem. So it's not for me to go around saying, I have these serious problems with someone. If the problems are of that more personal nature, right, he's not the kind of person I want to, let's say, have in workshops with me. But it doesn't mean I think he's a horrible person or anything like that. So, but even more just to your broader question, there's no public pronouncement is not an obligation by any stretch. Though a couple of things. Sometimes some objectivists get the idea they're supposed to have a stand on everything, a public stand. And that's stupid and ridiculous and self-aggrandizing. Again, the reason to judge is not to show I can judge, I can wave around this objectivist virtue. It's so that I know the people I'm dealing with and can make rational decisions about how to deal with them, whether it's go back to that pizza place, hire this person to be a tutor or take a ride from a roommate with, okay? At the same time, sorry, there was another thought I had there that just flew in one ear and out the other. I don't want to encourage people, excuse me, to shy away from judgment. I mean, you do. And I think sometimes certain people who are acculturated in a certain way think that toleration is all. And even some people who are attracted to Ayn Rand's philosophy, in effect, they have that, who am I to judge? Or, we're supposed to be tolerant, live and let live, and so on. No, you have to judge people sometimes. And you might, it might be appropriate to have a conversation with that individual, not to publicize it, not to put it all over social media or something, but gee, I'm having this problem with, or whatever. So I don't want to shield us from needing to make judgments sometimes, but that's different from these public pronouncements that some people feel compelled.
That's a really good point, because I've seen many people in the objectivist movement and outside just having broadcasting their opinions constantly, and that's fine. But sometimes it begs the question: should this always be the case, or sometimes I see no need for that, and sometimes I do see injustices that are so obscene that I just feel really compelled to say, I just don't really agree with this because of these reasons.
No, right. I mean, sometimes in response to somebody else's public pronouncement, you can think, no, this person, let's say, is being maligned as far as you can tell, is being unjustly criticized, let's say. And because you value that person a great deal, he's of great value to you, let's say, and maybe you think he's of great value to other people, and this is a severe injustice that's being done, it can be perfectly rational, given that the first negative judgment is very public, to want to say something about it, and it can be fine to do that, But also, in this rush to have a public position on everything, often people are not objective. That's exactly when they often race past the objectivity to make the hasty judgment. Oh, I have it, there's some controversy, I have to have an opinion by tomorrow. I mean, that's irresponsible. That's not objectively thinking things through.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And all right, Maria, should we transition to Q&A?
Yes, I think so. We have 15 more minutes. Tara, if you can stay with us until our 7:15. I don't know what time is it right now in Texas. So thank you both. It was a very good interview, and I really enjoyed it very much. So I'm judging in positive too. So
that's nice. That's good.
I give you the credit.
You can broadcast that you're allowed to go public with. Yeah.
So and for people, please, the audience, you can write your questions to the Q&A, but we already have many questions here, so I don't know if we will have time for all of them. But let's start with Santiago, who's asking, is it moral to have mercy on someone who has hurt me in some way? And if yes, how or why? The topic of mercy.
Good question. Good, interesting question. And I think, sometimes what we mean by have mercy is a little ambiguous. People mean 2 or 3 different things by it, okay? But mercy is extending unearned leniency. Like you're lenient with a person who they've wronged you in some way, right? Let's say they've wronged you in some way. That's why it even comes up. Should I be merciful here? Well, mercy means unearned leniency. Well, that's antithetical to the objectivist idea, to judging objectively and treating them as they deserve. If they don't deserve it, they don't deserve it. But let me say a little bit more about a closely related phenomenon, forgiveness, okay? Because I think in the same vein of what Santiago is asking, we often wonder about forgiving people, or most people assume you should forgive. You know, let bygones be bygones, we hear, or don't hold a grudge, or, oh, yeah, he did that to you, but that's water under the bridge. I mean, we have all these expressions encouraging forgiveness. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone, so you'll want to be forgiven someday. So there's a lot of, isn't forgiveness a virtue? How can that stand if justice is a virtue on Ayn Rand's account of justice, right? Well, she says on forgiveness, it is not a virtue. It's appropriate to forgive somebody who's wronged you only if he subsequently to doing that original wrong, right? Only if he subsequently earns your forgiveness, such that that's what he deserves from you. But it would be foolish to simply turn the other cheek, right? If this person really wronged you, there's no reason to forgive him unless he does things like show that, oh my God, that was really wrong of me. I should not have done that. I regret it. I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out why the hell I did that. What in me did that come from? That is not the person I want to be. I really want to root it out of my character. If you, the person who, the victim, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. If you see the person doing that, you see real evidence that act wasn't a good indicator of who he is, then you shouldn't treat it as if it is such an indicator, okay? But if he's not showing you that kind of thing, if he's just very blasé about it, or he gives you a breezy, oh, I'm sorry, let it go, or even a little less breezy, but just say, I'm sorry. But you don't see any signs that he really is sorry, that he really does regret it, that he really does get what was wrong with it. It would be stupid from a self-interested point of view to open yourself up to further abuse. So, I mean, one thing, just as I said, mercy can be a little bit ambiguous what people mean by that. Forgiveness seems to mix together emotions and attitudes and judgments. But I think of forgiveness as basically a kind of moral estimate of another person. It's a kind of moral appraisal. They've done something wrong to you. There's been a transgression. Forgiveness is your judgment that that transgression is not indicative of a grave moral defect on their part. It's not a sign of an irredeemably bad character. I mean, sometimes a good person does something really regrettable that even he comes to regret, right? So really what you're doing when you're forgiving somebody is you're passing a judgment of them about what that original transgression means about them. But if you have every reason to think that was really bad, and that's a bad sign about his character, and there's nothing pointing in the other way now, then it would be really foolish to forgive. So forgiveness is not a virtue in her view. There is no freestanding obligation to forgive people. That's not the default. But on occasion, sometimes you should forgive, but again, you should on the same basis on which you judge people. You go by the evidence. You judge them objectively. Do they deserve to be forgiven? Mm-hmm. And notice, even if you don't forgive somebody, that doesn't mean, and you should dwell on it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it can often be better for you just therapeutically, psychologically, to move on, but don't change your judgment of the person. I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to nourish my resentment of John for what he did to me, but nor am I going to pretend that he didn't do it. Right? You're not going
to hold a grudge, and you just, in a sense, hold a grudge in the sense I'm thinking all the time.
Right. I'm not going to dwell. Right, but look, I might resent it. Let's say Maria has wronged me in some way, and I've seen no sign that she gets it or doesn't want to be that person, then I'm not going to forgive her. I'm not going to act like I forgive her. And I might still resent her, but I'm not going to concentrate on how much I hate her or resent her. Yeah. It's no, move on, but my judgment is what it is until I see, no, she really regrets it. And she gets it.
So do you think that still in the topic of forgiveness, I have a short follow-up. Do you think the primary beneficiary of forgiveness is the person who's forgiven, or the person who is forgiving, or the person who is forgiven. Because, well, obviously what we normally hear, and we're challenging a lot of what we normally hear here right now. It's like it's an act of kindness to forgive, or something. It's very focused on the other that wronged you and feels bad or not, or whatever, and needs that forgiveness from you.
Right.
So,
well, normally, I mean, again, since the normal idea is you should forgive, like virtue requires that you forgive people. Yeah, that comes from be kind to them. It's good for them. Mm-hmm. It might be bad for you, but to hell with you, right? Because we're all altruists. We think to hell with what's good for you. But, Rand's view is you forgive when that's what the person deserves. But the whole reason to treat people as they deserve is because it's good for you, right? It's in your self-interest to practice justice, including justice in regard to forgiveness. So again, the whole reason to judge people objectively and treat them accordingly is that's how to take the best care of your values, right? Mm-hmm. The whole rationale for justice is self-interest. Well, similarly, it would be stupid for you, from a self-interested point of view, to fake other people's character when they've wronged you, or when they've wronged you but earned your subsequent forgiveness. So if somebody has earned my forgiveness, then yes, I should forgive him, but it's not a sacrifice. It's not an act of kindness. If he's really earned it, it's, well, this is now my assessment of who that person is. And again, these assessments are always subject to later revision if you find you made a mistake and so on, right? But it's not a sacrifice to forgive in the cases when you should forgive. But those cases are not nearly as many as most people assume, because they think, oh, you should always forgive. That's ridiculous. That's suicidal, right? I mean, that's just asking for the antithesis of yourself.
Yes, I agree with that, definitely. And I think that's a good segue to another question from the audience that we have here from Mauricio. He's asking, what are the long-term consequences of a mind who denies or evades to judgment of situations, behaviors, and individuals, including, of course, forgiveness?
Well, you're sort of disarming yourself. You're letting, well, let's go back to something I said earlier. We need to judge people. And in fact, we do judge people all the time on an everyday basis. Again, we may not be self-consciously reaching grand conclusions, but you're judging, I go to this pizza place, I go to this car mechanic, I go out with this friend, and so we're judging people all the time. If you really try to fudge your judgments or evade judgments, you're letting your judgment skills atrophy. You're letting them be dulled, right? I mean, you want to be a good thinker to reach valid conclusions and make good decisions about how to lead your life, how to take care of the things you care about, right? Thinking is good for you. Right? I mean, thinking well, thinking rationally, thinking sharply, precisely. And the more you do it, the more you can pay attention to what I did wrong in that case. Oh, yeah, I should pay more attention to these even more detailed considerations and so on. So you want to always be using your mind and training yourself to pay attention to screening the relevant from the irrelevant. I mean, that is a skill, and objectivity is a skill. This is maybe a good chance to say that. Nothing that you think is automatically right. We've talked a lot about objectivity this afternoon, but it's a skill. It takes practice, and you learn and you can become much better at being objective, but it takes practice. And if you're over the long term, as Mauricio asks, evading or avoiding making judgments, you're just not training your objective thinking skills, which put you in the best position to reach valid conclusions and make good decisions about the people around you who you have to judge. Yeah, so that's an interesting question.
And yes, I agree. And I definitely agree that thinking objectively and thinking with enough clarity is a practice, and it's a skill that you have to sharpen as you grow as a thinker, I think.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more question, and I think this is a good question related to that. And I will add a little bit to it for my own curiosity. But Jose is asking, what happens when you're trying to follow an idea or a principle, but you fail at applying it? You go against that idea. Is it okay to fail sometimes along the road, like when you're trying to become better? And my part that I'm adding here is, how should you judge yourself when you are trying your best, but you make mistakes?
Yeah. Again, really interesting questions. So Jose asks, is it okay to fail sometimes? It's not okay in the sense that, oh, no big deal, right? Most of us fail sometimes. We're trying to do this and, we go off the new budget or the New Year's resolution that we might have made a few months ago. I mean, in different ways, we sometimes disappoint ourselves. I didn't want to be doing that, in different ways. It's going to happen, right? But how do you respond? If you really did disappoint yourself, and this is something you take seriously, and you really did the wrong thing, or you let yourself down, well, then you need to pay attention to that. You need to acknowledge it to yourself, like, that was not good, Tara. That was not good. And it's often very helpful to try to understand, why did I do that? What was going on for me such that I gave in? I let myself take that shortcut, cheat in that way, whatever it might be that you've done wrong to disappoint yourself, right? It can be really helpful if you really do care about not doing that kind of thing. I don't want to be that person. It can be really helpful to try to understand, why did I do it? What led me to do it? What factor? Maybe I was too concerned with what other people would think. Maybe I was just going too fast. I was tired and I was feeling pressured and I was just going too fast rather than, whoa, think through what you're doing here, right? But whatever it is, you really have to be, again, honest with yourself and trying to understand, where did this come from? And okay, what can I do, if anything, to make myself less likely to give in to that temptation again? Okay, at least in that kind of temptation case or whatever, right? So is it okay? It's okay in the sense of, you shouldn't just, oh my God, I'm useless. I'm worthless. No, what would not be okay is not paying attention to it and doing what you can to try to understand it and avoid that same kind of mistake in the future. Right? If you make a mistake, face up to it and face up to what you need to do differently to try to minimize the chances of making that kind of mistake. So to broaden the question then to your follow-up a little bit, Augustina, I think it's basically implicit in what I've just said. How should you judge yourself? Honestly, objectively? So sometimes you really are going to be disappointed. It can happen. It's happened in my life. It's like, ooh, you really are. But you have to be honest with yourself about that. And just as I said earlier when we were talking about some people never want to admit that they made a mistake, or, they can't ask for forgiveness and so on. As long as you're honest with yourself, everything is doable and everything is fixable. And you can be great. You can be really good as long as you're honest with yourself. So judge yourself objectively, pay attention to all the evidence and try to learn from that. So, yeah. You can be kind, but that doesn't mean cut yourself slack. Yeah.
But I think it's very good, the feeling that you are a self-made person, so you're not determined. If you made a mistake, you can change it tomorrow. You will have another chance.
Yes.
And I think that's a very good feeling to cultivate.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point. The whole thing about justice and judging people, it presupposes we have free will. We're in charge of what we do. I'm in charge of what I do. And she's in charge of what she did. She didn't have to act that well. She deserves my praise. She didn't have to act that poorly. That deserves my condemnation, right? So yeah, it is all premised on this. We're in control, given that you want to, in effect, play with the good guys and praise and support the good guys, the virtuous, and not in any way support the bad guys, the characteristics in other people that are going to pull against our values.
That was really a fantastic answer, Tara. And I could talk to you for hours. To be honest, I keep asking you questions.
Well, I've had so much fun. I love this topic, as maybe you can tell. But I've really enjoyed, talking with you guys and the few people who we got some questions from. This has been really fun.
I hand you back the control, Maria.
Agustina, thank you very much.
Yeah, for my part, thank you, Tara, so much.
Sure, thank you.
It was really fun and super, it gave me a lot to think about. And Maria.
I think we should repeat this. I think we should repeat in a couple of months. We will invite you again, Tara. Okay. Agustina, you did a great job. It was a pleasure to listen to both of you. And Tara, you're an amazing person. I like you very much. It's very nice to listen to you. And also, of course, everything very, very interesting. So Nixon, who is the tech man who is there, thank you very much for your support. And I know that we have more questions. Hopefully we will have Tara again in the future, and maybe in Argentina and Ayn Rand who will visit her to visit us. So again, thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and hopefully we'll see you both soon.
Same here. Thank you all very much. Thank you all who participated this afternoon. Good. All right. I hope to see you soon.
A la audiencia.
Stay well.
Nos vemos muy pronto en las próximas semanas. Hasta luego. Bye bye.